New York, late 19th century. A city cloaked in the warm glow of gaslights, echoing with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the soft chime of crystal glasses in ballrooms that never slept. It was a time when wealth alone wasn't enough. Social acceptance, true acceptance, came not with money, but with something far rarer: approval. And the woman who held the power to grant or deny that approval? Caroline Astor. Known simply as Mrs. Astor, she reigned not through politics, business, or even inheritance, but through something far more intangible and far more dangerous: social dominance. To enter her drawing room was to be anointed. To receive an invitation to one of her exclusive balls at 355th Avenue was to cross an invisible threshold from mere wealth to aristocracy. She was the architect of the 400, a fabled list of names representing those who truly mattered in New York high society. It wasn't about who had the largest fortune, but who belonged, by lineage, by breeding, by behavior. And Caroline Astor, with her steely poise and unspoken rules, decided who did. Her name carried more weight than many senators. Her silence was more cutting than any public rejection. She determined which families rose and which were kept firmly in the shadows of new money ridicule. She wasn't just a hostess. She was a gatekeeper, a curator of class, and a queen without a crown, ruling over ballrooms and breakfast rooms alike. But what made Caroline's reign so remarkable wasn't just the opulence. It was the strategy. Behind every invitation, every floral arrangement, every inch of velvet drapery was intent. To control who mingled with whom, to reinforce old hierarchies, to quietly but powerfully ensure that not all were welcome. Because beneath the chandeliers and champagne, there existed a darker truth. Society, at its peak, was war disguised as waltz. And Caroline Astor? She was both general and gatekeeper. But before she controlled New York, before she anointed the elite, she had to come from somewhere. And that somewhere holds the first clue to understanding the iron will behind the silk gloves. Her origin was no accident. It was a foundation meticulously laid, and it's where our story truly begins. If Caroline Astor was the queen of New York society, then Alva Vanderbilt was the upstart storm knocking on the palace gates. The Vanderbilts were everything the Astors despised. They were new money, rich from railroads, factories, and steamships. Unlike the discreet elegance of the Knickerbockers, the Vanderbilts flaunted their wealth with marble mansions, French chefs, and a flair for spectacle. Alva Erskine Smith Vanderbilt was a woman of ambition and strategy. She knew that having money wasn't enough. She needed validation. And in 1883, she made her move. Alva built a palace, there's no other word for it, on Fifth Avenue, just blocks from Caroline's home. It was modeled after French chateau, filled with European art, and featured an opulent ballroom meant to rival the Astors. But the house wasn't the power play, the ball was. Alva announced she would host a grand masquerade ball, a spectacle unlike anything the city had ever seen. It would cost over $3 million in today's money. Invitations were the most coveted pieces of paper in New York. But one name was missing from the list: Caroline Astor. The message was clear. You may reign, but I control the battlefield now. For weeks, Caroline said nothing. Publicly, she maintained her usual air of superiority. But privately, the omission stung. Her daughter Carrie desperately wanted to attend. But how could Mrs. Astor allow it, if she herself hadn't been invited? What followed was a move so calculated, so subtle, that it remains a case study in social manipulation. Caroline paid a formal visit to Alva Vanderbilt. In 19th century etiquette, this was more than a gesture. It was a white flag, a recognition, an acknowledgement that Alva and the Vanderbilt name had arrived. Shortly after, the invitation arrived. Caroline and her daughter attended. The ball was a triumph. Newspapers fawned over the costumes, the decor, the unprecedented excess. But beneath the glitter was something deeper. The torch had been passed. Caroline had lost her monopoly on power. The gate she had once guarded now had multiple keys. And Alva had proven that wealth, combined with ambition, could bend even the oldest traditions. But Caroline wasn't finished. She responded not with confrontation, but consolidation. She tightened her grip on the 400, making it more exclusive than ever. She began hosting events with even stricter codes. She emphasized old values, heritage, and restraint, as if to remind society what real class looked like. Yet, for all her efforts, the tides were shifting. The Gilded Age was becoming more glitter than gold. The old families were retreating behind closed doors, while the new ones were buying press, headlines, and public adoration. Caroline had won many battles, but the war had changed. And in that change, we begin to see the final act of her reign, legacy preservation. Because when the world no longer bows to your rules, you don't fight harder, you build a myth. By the end of the 19th century, the landscape Caroline Astor had once ruled with an iron glove wrapped in silk was shifting beneath her feet. Technology, immigration, industry, all were transforming New York from a city of drawing rooms to one of boardrooms and boulevards. The old money families were becoming relics of a fading era. And Caroline, once the epicenter of social gravity, was increasingly a symbol, not a force. Yet she understood something few in her class did: how to exit gracefully. Rather than cling desperately to power, Caroline began to step back. Elegantly, deliberately. Her health was declining. She was aging. And more importantly, so was the world she built. In 1890, she passed much of her social responsibility to her son, John Jacob Astor IV, known to society as Jack. A man of immense wealth, Jack lacked his mother's sharp instinct for social warfare. But he had something she didn't: youth, modernity, and a taste for the new century. Caroline moved out of her Fifth Avenue mansion, the house with the famous ballroom designed to hold 400 guests, and took residence in a quieter space uptown. It was the architectural equivalent of a beau. But even as she faded from public view, Caroline wasn't done crafting her legacy. She curated it, she edited it, she made sure that what remained would be immaculate. She ensured her name remained etched in history, not just through the Astor name or the grandeur of her social reign, but through the very myth of the 400. To this day, the number is still whispered in books, period dramas, and historical essays. But few realize it wasn't based on lineage or even influence. It was simply the number of people her ballroom could physically fit. Yet Caroline let the myth live. Because power is perception, and perception is what survives. In her final years, she maintained a small circle, still received visitors, and was spoken of in reverent tones, as if she were royalty in exile. The press continued to refer to her as the Mrs. Astor, a title no other woman dared claim while she was alive. In 1908, at the age of 78, Caroline Astor died. There was no national mourning, no flags lowered to half-staff. But in the gilded parlors of Park Avenue, in the quiet salons of Newport, her passing was felt like the end of an era. She had not just defined society, she had personified it. And as the 20th century dawned, with its skyscrapers, suffragettes, and jazz clubs, the world moved on. But Caroline's name remained, not as a warm memory, not as a scandalous figure, but as a standard, an idea, a silhouette behind the curtain of history. Caroline Webster Schermerhorn was not born into wealth. She was born into something even rarer in 19th century New York: pedigree. The Schermerhorns were part of the Knickerbocker elite, a group of Dutch-descended families who had settled Manhattan when it was still New Amsterdam. These were names etched into the foundation of the city itself, long before railroad barons and oil tycoons arrived. They didn't have to earn respect. They were respect. Caroline grew up on Lafayette Place, a quiet, aristocratic neighborhood shielded from the encroaching noise of commerce. Her family upheld tradition like a religion: stiff dinner parties, rigid etiquette, alliances formed not out of love, but legacy. From a young age, Caroline absorbed it all: the way her mother hosted without ever seeming to command, the way a raised eyebrow could dismiss an entire family from consideration, the way wealth without manners was just money. She was taught not just to behave, but to belong. And that distinction would become her most dangerous weapon. In this world, Appearance was everything. Even the architecture mattered. A home's facade could signal your values, your bloodline, your place in the social order. The Schermerhorns naturally built theirs in the Greek Revival style, elegant, restrained, noble. But for Caroline, merely upholding tradition wasn't enough. She watched as new names, raw, unpolished, industrial, began to crowd the social pages. The city's skyline was growing, but so were its social ambitions. The nouveau riche were knocking at the gates. Caroline wasn't going to let them in. She understood what the old families didn't, that social dominance required adaptation. You couldn't just preserve the past. You had to wield it like a sword. So when she married William Backhouse Astor Jr., heir to the Astor real estate empire, it wasn't just a union of wealth and lineage. It was a masterstroke. The Astors were rich, unimaginably so, but Caroline brought them something money couldn't buy: social legitimacy. And in return, she gained access to resources that would elevate her influence to an imperial level. Her new home on Fifth Avenue wasn't just a residence, it was a fortress. A grand ballroom designed to fit exactly 400 guests, a number that would become legend. Caroline's rise wasn't a matter of luck. It was the result of years of silent observation, of calculated alliances, of saying the right thing at the right time to the right people. She was building a kingdom, not of land or industry, but of access. And she was about to decide who got in. But even queens have rivals. And Caroline's would come in the form of a woman who represented everything she hated: new wealth, new power, and new rules. Her name was Alva Vanderbilt, and their collision would change New York society forever. Caroline Astor is long gone. Her drawing rooms have been demolished, her guest lists forgotten. Her velvet gowns now rest in museums, if they've survived at all. And yet, her presence still lingers. In every period drama set in Gilded Age New York, in every whispered reference to the 400 in social columns, in every modern socialite desperate to belong, Caroline Astor lives on, not as a person but as a blueprint. She didn't invent high society, but she codified it. She didn't write books, but she authored a hierarchy. To this day, her life raises questions that still haunt us. Who gets in? Who decides? And why do we keep playing the same game, just with different clothes, different venues, and different currencies of power? In many ways, Caroline's myth outlived her relevance. The 400 was a fiction, created, curated, and enforced by a woman who understood better than anyone that social power is never granted. It's taken. And then, protected. She never ran for office. Never led an army. But she controlled access. And in the world of elite society, access is everything. That myth would go on to inspire generations of storytellers, filmmakers, and social critics. From Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence to HBO's The Gilded Age, her world is recreated again and again, always with fascination, sometimes with disdain, but never with indifference. Because Caroline Astor wasn't just a character of her time. She was a symbol of a system that still echoes today. It may no longer be about cotillions and calling cards, but the essence remains. Influencers chase blue checkmarks the way heiresses once chased dance cards. Exclusive galas still determine who's in, though now the velvet ropes are digital. The game hasn't ended, it's evolved. But what Caroline understood, better than any modern brand strategist or PR agent, is that status is most powerful when it feels inherited, not earned, when it seems effortless. When it's laced with mystery, restraint, and just enough exclusion to make everyone else yearn for entry. In that sense, Caroline Astor was the original curator of exclusivity culture. And maybe that's why she fascinates us still. Not because we wish we'd been invited to her ball, but because part of us knows we're still waiting for someone like her to tell us we're enough.